everybody, and Céad Míle Fáilte, the 100,000 welcomes to Kerry Writers Museum and our Rambling House in August 2021. We have a great woman for you tonight with a beautiful, beautiful name. Her name is Maria Whatton. So I'm just going to ask Maria to join me now. Hello, Maria. How are you?
I'm good. Good to see you, Maria.
It's so lovely to invite you to my part of the world and to this very traditional corner of the world in our Rambling House. So we're really looking forward to hearing your beautiful stories. And then you're going to be entertained by the Kerry throngs until late into the night. And after that, we'll give you last say, because we always give last say to our most important visitor. What do you think about that?
That's all great stuff. I'm looking forward to it.
Great. And Maria, just to let everybody know, we've never actually met face to face. Isn't that amazing?
I know, but I feel like I know you, Maria.
And I feel like I know you as well. And no more than we have this little rambling house in Cyber Kerry, you have a beautiful rambling house in the Brew house. Would you like to tell us how that came about and how it's been going for you during this strange time?
Yeah, in normal times, I run a story club in the Brew house, which is in Burton on Trent, which is in the Midlands. And I've been running that for years. And so every month we get a different featured storyteller. It's live, it's wonderful. We have floor tellers, we have cake, we have beer, we have wine. it's just a great night out. And then with the pandemic, I took it online and I've been running it every week since last May.
Yeah, and that's where I got to know Maria. So I've told some stories at Maria's wonderful Once Upon a Wednesday. And if you guys would be interested in that, they have a Facebook page and you can look that up. But also, Maria, I'm hoping that we might have a Hands Across the Sea sometime where we come and see you and you come back to see us. Would that be good?
Yeah, that would be really great. We're going to start live sessions again in November. So we hope, if all goes well, we'll be back up and running live. But also the weekly sessions have been so popular that we are going to continue them. Next Wednesday is going to be my last session as host as such. After 68 sessions consecutively, Maria, I've done 68 sessions every single week without a break.
I know.
I've never been ill, thank God, or anything. So it's gone right the way through. And Colin Owen is going to take over from me because he's one of our regulars.
He is, and he's brilliant. He's actually a guest at our live festival, which is happening from the 17th to the 19th of September. It's 3 weeks from tomorrow, Maria. 21 sleeps. I don't think I'd sleep at all until it's here, you know. But Colin is a well-known face here, and we're really looking forward to having him. And I'm sure that if anybody from here would like to go along, that Colin's familiar face will make it feel like home. So we've been connecting all through COVID with these gorgeous little sessions. You've all heard a little bit about it now. And when this lifts, we have a chance to do something new, to have Hands Across the Sea, to begin to travel to one another's story sessions. And I'm really looking forward to that as well.
Yes,
Maria, I think I've spoken long enough. I'm going to let you off to tell your beautiful stories. You get 30 minutes and then I'll come in and say hello again. And then we'll entertain you. Mwah.
Thank you, Maria. That's just such a great introduction. And hello, everyone. It's so good to see you all. I thought that it might be a good idea for me to introduce myself because, as you can hear already, I am from Liverpool originally. And it was when I was growing up that I was told the stories that I tell so regularly. And I thought it might be really great tonight for you guys to hear the stories I tell that my dad told me. So they are all Irish tales, but through the filter of Scousness. And so I wanted to tell you, first of all, about my dad, because my dad was a plasterer. He worked on building sites all his life. But when he came back from work, I remember we'd all rush to sort of see my dad. And he used to wear overalls every day. And because he was a plasterer, by the time he came home, the plaster would have set on his overalls and his hair would be white, pure white, and his face, he looked like a walking statue, my dad, because it had dried off. You know, you'd see all these bits of plaster crumbling from his overalls and little puffs of white smoke as he walked. And he'd come home to us, 8 of us, 8 children. I'm one of 8 children. And we lived in a tiny little council house in Liverpool, which only had 3 bedrooms. So here's a bit of maths for you. My mum and dad had 1 bedroom. And so there are 2 bedrooms left for 8 children. And you'd think, wouldn't you, that there'd be 4 in each, but not if there are 7 girls and 1 boy. Yes, I shared a bedroom as one of 7 sisters. There were 3 bunk beds and a single bed. And the oldest always had that single bed. And as my older sisters got engaged to get married, I'd be working my way to that bed, that single bed. That was the aim. And my brother got his own bedroom all to himself. However, what he did miss out on was this. My mum would go to work in the biscuit factory at night. And so we'd call my dad to tell us stories. And he'd come up the stairs. He must have been absolutely shattered, poor bloke. But he'd turn off the light and he'd stand in the doorway and his voice would come into the darkness. And my dad could rub a couple of old sentences together and create a fire of the imagination. And that's what would happen. I'd be on the top bunk bed with my eyes closed, but if I opened them, it would be as though the ceiling was crumbling away, the tiles flying off the roof like birds. It was like I was staring up at the dark night sky, listening to his words, looking up at the 7 sisters in the sky, eternally chased by Orion. 7 sisters in the sky, 7 sisters in their beds, listening in the darkness to their dad, telling them stories. Those stories carried me all through my childhood. I am, by the way, the only one who remembers them. And some of those stories I tell, I can't help it, just like my dad told me, even with the same pronunciations. So forgive me, because my dad was both Irish and Liverpudlian. And I just say some of the things as my dad told me. But also, sometimes when my dad was telling stories, I'd be hearing them. And I would be thinking about those stories in quite a different way. When I was a teenager, I remember standing at a bus stop, waiting for a bus that never came. You know, can you remember how cold it was if you had to stand at the bus stop? Your feet freezing cold, your fingers freezing cold. I remember I would stand at this bus stop going to my friend's house on Queen's Drive in Liverpool. Bored, but as the cars whizzed past, I'd hear the sea. I'd look across the road and those flats, blocks of flats, would become a castle surrounded by the sea. And I'd hear my dad's voice in my head telling me the stories that he had been told by his dad, and his dad had been told by his dad and his grandma. There was once a great castle in Ballybunion. If you look at the cliffs there, that wild sea has torn away at the rock faces. like its claws tearing at those rocks like pickaxes. There are caves all along that rock face. There's one which is like a bulbous shape. It's like a bowl. It fills up from the bottom with the sea. In the castle nearby, there was a great warrior chief. He had 7 daughters, 7 girls, and they were kept in that castle day and night. Their father was so concerned about them leaving the castle and getting into bother that they were imprisoned in a beautiful way. It was very comfortable inside. The girls had very soft beds, good food to eat, but they could only watch the world from the windows of that castle. They'd look out at the sea. One night, there was a great storm. And as they looked out of their window, they saw a ship. It was a Viking ship. The warriors, their father's warriors, were already out there. They saw them in the distance on the beach. And they saw that those warriors were dragging something across the shingly sand. And then they heard something down in the bottom of the castle, in the dungeons. They heard a strange music. It was a music that they had not heard before, were not familiar with. That music was the sound of young men's voices. You see, 6 of those Vikings and their captain had been captured, and now they were down in the dungeons talking in their strange voices. And the 7 sisters listened. They liked that sound. They were intrigued by that sound. And the following night, they decided that they would go down. They knew that it was the old god, a really old man who looked after the dungeons with his set of keys hanging from his waist. They knew that he was always fast asleep. And they tiptoed down the stone staircase, down into the dark dungeon, where they heard those young men's voices. And then, in the darkness, they began to see the faces of those young men. The old guard was snoring. Between each snore, the girls spoke. We'll help you. Who are you? We'll bring balm. The young men couldn't understand these young women. They spoke in different languages, but they reached out their hands, and the girls touched the young men's hands. Oh, there was such a shiver through their arms, through their bodies. The following night, they did the same thing, only this time they had made a balm from comfrey root, from sphagnum moss. And now, as the young men put out their hands, the young women put the balm on their arms, on their bruises, on their cuts, and they spoke. And there is a language greater than any language, and that is the language of love. You see, these young women were already falling in love with these young men. They were so naive. They'd never been out of that castle, but they loved the sound of those young men's voices. They loved the shape of their faces. As they touched their cuts and bruises on their face, they grazed their fingers past their blonde beards. They liked the touch of their beards on the faces. And night after night, when they came down to visit the young man, night after night, their longing grew, as did the young men's. And that was a longing of freedom and desire. We'll help you escape, they said. And it was just as well they said that, because their father was already planning that those 7 Vikings would be taken out and humiliated and then hung by the neck as a warning to anyone else who may trespass upon his land. He made sure that everybody knew that if there was any disloyalty to him, the punishment would be death. The night before, the young men were meant to be hung by the neck. Those young women came down those stone steps, but this time they brought a drug made of valerian root and poured it into the sleeping guard's cup. When he woke, just for a moment, and took a sip, as you would do at night with just a sip of water, he went into an even deeper sleep, and so they were able to take his keys, open that dungeon, and they fell into each other's arms, caressing each other, each sister with each young, handsome Viking. And then they made their escape out of that castle, the girl showing them where the beach was, where the men kept their boats. But the sound of their feet on that shingle disturbed the warriors that were out there, sleeping, meant to be on guard. And soon they were being chased. And soon the girls were captured, but the young men, they were still fit. And they were able to escape. They took one of the boats and with their great burly arms began to plough through the sea. That was not the case for the young women. The young women were taken back and made to kneel before their father. Remember, said the captain of the guards, remember, you said anyone who was disloyal to you would be hung. The father looked at his daughters pleaded with him. He couldn't do it. He just couldn't kill his own daughters. So what he did instead was turn his back on them and say to the captain of the guards, I leave them to you. And he walked away, hearing their cries as he went. And the captain of the guards took those young women to that great bulbous bowl of a cave. They were chained in the bottom of that cave until the sea came up and filled the whole of that cave like a great jug. Of course, each one of them drowned, and over time, their bones rattled and turned in the waves until they eroded completely, becoming part of the sea. It's sad that if you go there on certain nights, you'll still hear those girls' voices trapped in those waves, calling for the young men who left them. I think my dad was trying to tell us something, don't you? I think he was giving us a message there somehow, his 7 daughters. But you know, sometimes when my dad told stories, it was my filter, I think, that made me think perhaps that isn't the way to tell them. I'm going to tell you a story that you probably all know now, but I'm going to tell you it in the way that I heard it, not in the way my dad told it, not in the way I hear many people tell it, because this story is the story of a princess. She was born into privilege. Her mother was a queen and her father the High King of Ireland. And so as soon as she was born, everyone gathered around her and made a fuss over her. She was the best thing ever. That's what everyone was saying. And you know, as she was a child, she was doted upon. This little girl, her name was Grania, didn't know the food needed to be cooked. She didn't know that a fire needed to be made to cook the food on. It just appeared because she had servants. She didn't know that a bed needed to be made. She didn't know that clothes needed to be sewn. She didn't know any of that because she was a princess. She did love to ride horses, though. She was a great rider. And by the time she was a teenager, she loved to ride. She loved to ride her great stallion. Through the forest she went, in between the dark trees. On this day, a cloud of white butterflies fluttered past her. It was magnificent. And when she came out of the forest, she heard something and she wanted to follow it. She slowed her stallion to a trot and then called him to a halt, then dismounted the horse and watched what was going on. It was a group of young men playing hurley. Her eye was snagged by one young man. He scored 3 goals, one after the other, and he was handsome. He had dark hair. It was more than that, though. It was the way he held himself, the way he ran, the way he smiled. He had such great joy in him, and she could not take her eyes off him. She stood there for a long time. It was as though those butterflies from the forest had entered her body and now were flying around in her stomach. Her heart was palpitating. Her palms were sweating. She didn't understand what was going on. She got back on her horse. She went back to the castle of Tara and she could not get him out of her mind. If ever she was feeling down, it was a grey day. She thought of that young man's face and she felt the joy he felt when he was playing the hurley game. When it came to the time that her father said, it's time for you to marry, she hoped. She just hoped. One young warrior after the other was introduced to her. Her father, considering that the young man who came would be able to expand his kingdom if the marriage went ahead. But he told Grania that she would have a choice. She could choose and he would supply the young men. Well, one after another, she turned up her nose at them because she'd say, Dad, did you not notice he had really funny eyes? Dad, did you not smell his breath? Did you hear him try to make a joke? Oh, sorry, no, very well, daughter, said her father. It's your choice. When she was 17 years old, almost 18, they had visitors. It was the father they saw, Grania's father. The visitors were Oisin and Oscar. That's Finn McCool's son and grandson. You see, Finn McCool, his wife Monasha had died the year before, and they'd noticed that Finn was not in a good temper. He was growing old now, and he needed a woman. He needed someone close to him to soften his temperament. And of course, Grania's father smiled from ear to ear. He thought, Finn McCool's my enemy now. I could make him my friend. It would be very worthwhile. Without consulting Grania, he agreed. And they went back and they told Finn that he must come to a banquet for his betrothal. Finn was happy. Grania had a great reputation. She was a beauty indeed. And it wasn't just the fact that she had a great tumble of dark hair. It wasn't just the fact that her eyes were as emerald green as the sea and her smile was wicked. No, it was the fact that there was some spark inside her that you really wanted to be with her. We may call it confidence now. We may just call it magic. But she had it. When her father told her that her betrothed was coming and that she would be very pleased, her heart lifted. She thought of the young man she'd seen all those years ago, and she felt happy and hopeful. It must be him, she thought, because my father knows me and loves me. Of course, the banquet was all laid out, and the men of the Fianna arrived. They sat at the banqueting tables, and Grania, well, she didn't walk into that room. She sashayed into that room. The men looked at her, and they couldn't take their eyes off her. She sat next to her father and mother, and she looked around and she saw all the men sitting down and laid eyes on Oisin. He had golden hair, good chin, broad shoulders, about her age. She thought, he's not bad, maybe that's him. She looked at Kielter. He was so thin, wiry, you might say, always running a darting smile on his face. Not bad, she thought, but a little skinny. Then she looked at Gol McMorna. No, hope it's not him, she said, And then she saw an old man sitting next to Gol McMorna. He had silver hair and a chin that were flapped as he moved from one side to the other. He had a bald patch as he turned on the back of his head. She said to her father, Dad, which one is it? Which one am I meant to marry? Her father smiled. It's him, he said. It's that one over there, Finn McCool, the great warrior. You'll have heard stories about him. Which one? Said Grania. Him. You are having a joke, aren't you? You mean the old granddad with the grey hair and the jowls? What do you mean? Said her father. That's Finn McCool. Grania was horrified. Just then, one of the Fianna was late. When he came into that room, Dermot O'Dovna, she knew that was the man she'd been waiting for years. His dark hair, his carefree smile, his warmth, his beauty that emanated from within. It was as though he was walking in slow motion across that room. And there and then, Grania made the decision that she was not going to marry that old goat. She was going to marry him. When she thought about her wedding night with Finn McCool and what that would be like, her soft, pale skin rubbing against that leathery, old, wrinkled man, no way. She shot upstairs. She got a sleeping draught prepared quickly, and she came back to the banqueting hall. She poured it into the mead and went like a servant, pouring it into each vessel of the Fianna except for Dermot's. And when they all fell to sleep, including her father and mother, and there was just her and Dermot awake, she looked him straight in the eyes and she said, "I've been waiting for you for years. I want to marry you. I don't want to marry that old man." "Wait," said Dermot. And it was hard for him to say because already he was becoming entranced by her. He said, "I am a loyal warrior to Finn, and I would never betray him." But even as he was saying those words, there were sensations in his body that he could not resist. "I put a geisha upon you," she said. "You will adhere to this promise that you will make to me that we will escape from here tonight. And you and I will live our lives together." Dermot could not really resist her, and yet he had pangs of guilt in his heart, but he allowed her to lead him out through the summer house. And into the darkness they went. When the Fianna awoke the next morning, and when Finn McCool saw that she'd gone and that Dermot had gone, and the recognition that they had eloped, he was furious. The humiliation. It was then that he also got the trackers from Clan Nevin on board to go and seek them out. And he said to them, "If you don't bring them back alive so that I can deal with them, I will hang you all." This great warrior who had been such a gentle and generous man as a young man. Now he was bitter with envy. Do you know, Dermot and Grania were tracked for 7 long years. In that time, Grania learned many things. At first, Dermot wouldn't touch her, but when he saw this woman who, after night after night, looking dishevelled now and no longer in court clothes, but in tatters and rags, who learned to build a fire, blow on it, and to cook food, which she'd never done before, he began to admire her even more. One day when they were on stepping stones near the Shannon, and she pulled up her skirts and the water washed up her legs, and she looked at him and she said, "You know, this water is braver than you, Dermot, because it will go somewhere that you never will." It was at that moment he just couldn't resist her. He put his arms around her, and it was on those shores that they slept together for the first time at night. But let me tell you, 7 long years of being tracked. Angus Og, godfather of Dermot, warned them that wherever they ate, they could never sleep. They could never sleep in the same place 2 nights on the run. Can you imagine what that was like, being tracked for 7 years, camping for 7 years, moving every day for 7 years? And when Grania became pregnant with their first child, and her body was heavy and she just wanted to sleep and rest, she couldn't. In all, they had 5 children, 4 boys and a girl. And after 7 years and many adventures, Angus Og helped Finn McCool call a truce, call it all off. And at long last, Dermot and Grania settled in Keshcoran, and Finn McCool said that he would hunt them no longer. He was tired himself, if truth be told. He was a really old man now. But Grania had a good heart. And when time passed and her children had grown up, she said to Dermot, let's have a banquet. We made peace a long time ago. Let's eat together. Finn McCool was called, and they ate, and they made peace together. Or so they thought. But you know, jealousy sometimes lingers in the heart much, much longer. And the next day, Finn McCool invited Dermot out hunting on Ben Bulben. It was there the prophecy came true. The wild boar of Ben Bulben killed Dermot with his sharp tusk. And Finn McCool, still desperately jealous, spiteful, was the only one who could save Dermot. Go fetch water, clear water from the well, said Ushin. But when Finn McCool did that and had in his hands the cure, he allowed the water to trickle 3 times from his hands. Grania did not need anyone to tell her that her love had died. All the birds of the air stopped singing. All the creatures of the forest were still. The clouds in the sky drifted slowly, and the sky began to cry heavy tears for the death of her love. Finn McCool, well, he still wanted her. After the death of her husband, Finn McCool said, your husband's dead. You were always betrothed to me. Marry me. And Grania, she said, yes, I will. Can you imagine what it was like for Finn McCool night after night, staring at a woman who was still young and still very beautiful, but being so old he could no longer do anything about it. And that is the story of Dermot and Grania, which I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for listening. Time, I see, is moving on. So thanks, Maria, and I'm going to pass you back to Maria now.
Oh, it was so beautiful. That was a weaving of a story, Maria, you know. And people have been saying to me all week, you're going to be Maria squared, Maria Whatton and Maria Gillen. And I like that, and I take that on, you know, the synergy of the Marias, you know. So Maria,
the mighty Marias.
The mighty Marias, the mighty, magical, mystical Marias. So Maria, you get to sit back now and get to be entertained by the throngs. And first up, I have a mighty Kerry woman, and then I have a man all the way from the north, and their names are the same. How about that?